The 1st of September 1939, Poland. Germany strikes with a sudden and crushing force, sending tanks and aircraft deep into Polish territory before defenders can regroup. Roads fill with refugees as villages burn, and columns of civilians come under fire from the sky. The German army tears through the country with terrifying speed, and 17 days later, the Soviet Union enters from the east, sealing Poland's defeat. Between the two invading armies, towns are occupied, families are expelled, and shootings, beatings, and mass arrests become part of daily life. Yet the violence only strengthens the will to resist, and underground networks begin to grow in forests, fields, and crowded city streets. As German terror intensifies, entire communities are marked for destruction, and the occupiers turn villages into examples meant to break the nation's spirit by murdering women, children, and elderly. One such village becomes Miknuf, where during 2 days in July 1943, the Germans kill in cold blood 102 men, 54 women, and 48 children. However, this atrocity will not remain unpunished, and the main perpetrators will pay for their crimes with their own lives. The village of Michniów stood on the edge of dense woods, its farms scattered along the road between towns Cichociemni and Bodzentin in south-central Poland. Before the war, its people lived modestly, working in forestry, in nearby factories, and on the thin, unproductive land around their homes. But Michniów was also a place of old patriotic traditions. Families had fought in earlier uprisings against occupiers through Polish history, and when the Second World War started on the 1st of September 1939, and Germans, Slovaks, and Soviets attacked Poland, many men joined the Polish army. Soon after the defeat, underground structures of the Polish resistance appeared in the region. Couriers were sheltered, weapons repaired, food shared, and messages carried across the forest paths that the villagers knew since childhood. By 1943, Michniów had become an important base for the underground movement, as the first resistance units were organized in this territory, and later the Cichociemni, or Silent Unseen, elite Polish agents sent from Great Britain, used the village as a shelter and resting point for them and their forces. Houses became meeting places, workshops were hidden in barns, and the Massacred family acted as trusted liaisons for couriers moving through the region. When Lieutenant Jan Piwnik, one of the agents sent from the United Kingdom known also as Ponury, arrived in this territory in June 1943, he found in Michniów a community already deeply committed to the Polish underground. His patrols often stayed in the village, and the locals supported them with food, repairs, and shelter, help that in the eyes of the Germans marked Michniów as a target. At the same time, German terror in the surrounding countryside grew harsher, and the so-called Pacification operations swept across villages. German gendarmes and SS men burnt homes, shot civilians, and carried out public executions meant to break the will of nearby communities. The 62nd Motorized Gendarmerie Platoon under SS Obersturmführer Herbert Schuster was particularly brutal, and their actions, together with those of the other SS and police units, filled the regions with stories of burnt farms, murdered families, and unexplained disappearances. Lists of suspected underground supporters circulated among officers of the Gestapo, the Nazi secret police. Names from Michniów began to appear on these lists, with details that could only come from informers or repeated surveillance. Whether the Germans acted on denunciations alone or used Michniów's resistance activity as a simple pretext mattered little. By early July, the decision to destroy the village had already been made. On the night of the 11th of July, 1943, German units closed in from several directions. They formed two tight rings around Michniów, one pressed against the village itself, the other blocking all forest paths. At dawn, the occupiers entered the settlement. Women and men leaving early for work were stopped, searched, and forced to lay face down on the ground at the forest edge. In the village itself, soldiers burst into homes, dragging men outside with blows and shouts. Families watched helplessly as fathers, brothers, and sons were beaten, lined up, or shot for the smallest hesitation. Some victims tried to show papers or explain their presence, but the Germans refused to listen. Soon, the Germans began reading names from a prepared list. Those called were taken to several barns on the southern edge of the village. The victims were driven inside with blows from rifle butts. When the doors were shut, the Germans threw grenades inside, fired in bursts with machine guns, and set the buildings on fire. The barns burned quickly, collapsing with the weight of the roof beams. Those trapped inside died screaming as flames consumed the walls. Elsewhere, the Germans shot men in the back of the head after confirming their names. Families believed to cooperate with the underground were murdered with special cruelty. At the Vikwa farm, the father was shot first, then his children, aged 16, 14, 11, 8, and 5, and finally their mother. Their house was set on fire, and the bodies of other victims were thrown into the burning house. By midday, smoke rose from many farms, and 95 men, 2 women, and 5 children were dead. News of the massacre reached Jan Pivnik's resistance unit in the hills near the village. Shock and grief spread among his soldiers, because many of them came from Michniów or knew its people. Pivnik rushed his men toward the village, but the German column had left moments earlier. That same evening, the Partisans staged revenge. They successfully halted a fast train on the Warsaw-Kraków line and stormed the wagons marked for Germans only. A fierce firefight followed, and at the end of it, at least a dozen Germans were killed or wounded. On the wooden walls of the carriages, the Partisans carved 2 words that echoed through the district: Za Michniów, meaning for Michniów. But this revenge brought a new danger to the villagers who survived the first massacre. The next morning, on the 13th of July, 1943, German police and gendarmerie returned in strength to the village. The Germans, before they entered the village, took positions on the hill west of the settlement and cut off every path from the forest, and opened fire on houses and barns. Some villagers had fled during the night, but many had remained, hoping the worst had already passed. Women, children, the elderly, those who believed that the Germans would kill only suspected underground fighters, stayed, and this belief proved fatal. The Germans entered Michniów again and began killing systematically. Women were driven from homes and shot near wells, barns, and fields. Children clutching their mothers were thrown into burning buildings or executed at close range. One of the most horrific deaths was that of 9-day-old Stefanek Dąbrowa, who had just been baptized that morning in a nearby village. The baby, along with his grandmother and godmother, was herded into a barn and burnt alive. The mother, still weak after childbirth, was murdered in her home in the village. Entire families disappeared within minutes. By the end of the day, another 102 victims lay dead, 7 men, 52 women, and 43 children. The Germans then burnt almost every remaining building. Only a stone barn and the forester's lodge survived. When they marched away, they took dozens of animals and forced several villagers to drive the herds to the forest, where the livestock was loaded onto trucks. 16 of these villagers were lined up for execution, but unexpectedly released. The Germans forbade rebuilding of the village and treated the survivors as outlaws. The mayors of the surrounding villages were forbidden to help the survivors, and the Michniów area was intensively patrolled by the German military police. Anyone found near the ruins risked being shot. In the weeks that followed, fugitives attempting to recover crops or belongings were murdered. Some of the wounded or captured villagers were later deported to concentration camp Auschwitz, and only 3 of them survived the war. The bodies of the dead were buried on the 15th of July, 1943, in a common grave near the school by residents of neighboring villages. The Germans allowed the burial, but ordered the grave to remain without cross or any other mark. After the Germans left, members of the Polish underground placed signs on the railway tracks nearby with messages describing the massacre, calling it a German cartoon. The name Michniów became a symbol of the fate that befell hundreds of Polish villages. At least 299 of them were destroyed by Germans, nearly 20,000 civilians murdered in rural pacification actions. But at the end, justice caught up with the murderers, and some of them died already during the war. The betrayal of Jerzy Wojnowski, alias Motor, was uncovered less than 6 months after the pacification of Michniów, and this informer was executed on the 28th of January 1944 in the village of Milejowice. Leo Metz, commandant of the gendarmerie post in Cichociemni, and one of the officers identified in Michniów, was killed by Polish partisans in late 1944. SS officers Adolf Feucht and Otto Göring were both killed in 1945 before the end of the war. Other perpetrators faced post-war trials. The destruction of Michniów was discussed also during the 1949 trial of SS-Brigadeführer Herbert Böttcher, the SS and police commander of the Radom district. He was convicted and executed in June 1950. Otto Büssig, recognized by survivors as one of the policemen who had taken part in the killings, was sentenced to death and executed in May 1950. Julius Hein, another participant in the Michniów Massacre, was also sentenced to death and executed. In the decades that followed, further investigations brought more perpetrators to trial. In 1969, gendarmerie captain Gerulf was tried in Graz in Austria. Though Michniów itself was not included in the indictment, he was convicted for other mass crimes in the region and sentenced to 10 years of heavy prison time. Meanwhile, in East Germany, SS Obersturmführer Albert Schuster, whose motorized gendarmerie platoon had terrorized the Polish countryside, was arrested after information was provided by Polish investigators. In 1973, he was convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity and executed by shooting in Leipzig prison. Yet, the memory of Michniów endured. Survivors rebuilt their lives in nearby towns, but the ruins of the village remained a silent reminder of the 2 days in July 1943, when an entire community was extinguished. After the war, the site became a place of mourning. Later, a symbol of rural martyrdom. Today, the Mausoleum in Michniów stands where barns once burned and where families waited for the last blows. The name of the village, destroyed but not forgotten, remains one of the starkest reminders of the brutality of the German occupation against Polish citizens during the Second World War.
Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.